The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, throwing golden light across the grand ballroom as music and laughter filled the air. 250 guests in their finest gowns and tailored suits sipped champagne, snapping photos of Chloe Ramirez, the glowing bride, as she twirled in her designer gown. I had been standing quietly at the edge of the dance floor, waiting for the right moment to approach. I wanted to congratulate her, to finally bridge the icy distance that had defined our relationship. When Chloe spread her arms wide, smiling sweetly and calling me forward, I thought maybe this was my chance. My heart softened, foolishly believing her sudden warmth. I stepped forward, careful but nervous, and leaned in for a hug. That's when it happened. My heel caught the trailing edge of her gown, tugging lightly at the delicate fabric. I froze, mortified, but before I could even stammer an apology, Chloe's hand cracked across my cheek with such force that the sound echoed like a gunshot through the room. Gasps erupted, followed by a stunned silence. And then, with calculated cruelty, she snatched a glass of red wine from a nearby waiter's tray and hurled it down the front of my cream-colored dress. The icy liquid soaked through the fabric, crimson spreading like blood over silk. My body burned with humiliation as 250 eyes turned toward me, watching, whispering, judging. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I stood there frozen, one hand instinctively pressing against the stinging heat of my cheek, the other clutching helplessly at my ruined dress. I wanted to disappear into the marble floor beneath my heels, to escape the suffocating weight of hundreds of stares. Some of the guests looked horrified, others amused, but none moved to intervene. Chloe stood triumphant, her manicured hand still trembling from the slap, her lips curled into a smirk as she declared for all to hear, "How dare you ruin my perfect day?" My mouth opened, searching for words, but nothing came out. I had only meant to show her love, to extend kindness on her wedding day. Yet somehow, in a matter of seconds, I had become the villain in her story. And then came the final blow, not from Chloe, but from the man who should have been standing beside me. Ethan, my husband of 3 years, Chloe's protective older brother, stepped forward with a look of cold disapproval. "Ava," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the silence like another slap. "You should have been more careful. This is her day, and you nearly destroyed it." His arm slipped protectively around his sister as if I were the intruder, the careless outsider who had trespassed on sacred ground. My heart cracked open in that moment, the betrayal cutting deeper than the sting on my cheek or the wine soaking through my dress. 250 guests watched the scene unfold, frozen in uneasy silence, and I realized with chilling clarity I was utterly alone. The sting of Chloe's slap still lingered on my cheek, but it was Ethan's words that truly broke me. I stood in that grand ballroom dripping red wine, trembling under the weight of silence, and felt the ground shift beneath my feet. My husband, the man I had chosen, the man I had believed would stand by me against the world, had just sided with his sister, publicly, without hesitation, without even glancing in my direction for the truth. He had thrown me to the wolves, and the wolves were already circling. I could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd like a current I couldn't escape. "Did you see that?" one woman hissed, clutching her pearls as though I'd committed some unspeakable sin. "She ruined the dress," another man muttered, his tone sharp with judgment. My eyes darted across the sea of faces, some filled with pity, others with smug satisfaction, but none offering refuge. My cheeks burned not just from the slap, but from the shame of being exposed, of being diminished to nothing in front of hundreds. I had spent years keeping myself small for Ethan. Years of stepping aside so he could shine, biting my tongue when Chloe hurled subtle insults, playing the role of the quiet wife who never asked for too much, never made waves. And what had it earned me? Not love. Not loyalty. Only betrayal. 3 years of marriage, and not once had Ethan truly chosen me over his family. I remembered the early days of our relationship, when he had charmed me with his laughter, when he had looked at me like I was the center of his world. I had been so blinded by what I thought was love that I ignored the red flags. How Chloe always came first, how his parents whispered about me as if I were an inconvenience, how Ethan never defended me, not even when the words cut deep. At the time, I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. Family mattered to him, and I wanted to believe there was space for me in that picture. But tonight, under the glare of chandeliers and judgmental eyes, the truth was undeniable. There had never been space for me at all. Chloe pressed her face into Ethan's shoulder like a child needing comfort, her crocodile tears staining his tailored jacket. She looked up at him with the perfect expression of wounded innocence, her voice trembling just enough to convince the crowd of her victimhood. "I just wanted to thank her," she whimpered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "and she ruined my dress on purpose." The words twisted like knives, her lies slipping seamlessly into the narrative she was crafting. A wave of disapproving murmurs swept through the room, sealing my humiliation. Ethan didn't correct her. He didn't stop her. He simply stroked her hair, murmuring words of reassurance, as though I were nothing more than a reckless intruder at his sister's fairy tale wedding. His arm tightened protectively around her, and his eyes, those eyes that once promised devotion, met mine with coldness I'd never seen before. "Ruth should have been more careful," he said, his voice firm, final, dismissive. "She knows better." In that moment, the woman I had been, the wife who hoped love was enough, who thought sacrifice meant strength, died a quiet death inside me. I felt myself shrinking, suffocating under the weight of their cruelty. I had walked into that ballroom as Ethan's wife, but now, standing before 250 witnesses, I was cast as the villain. The clumsy, thoughtless outsider who had dared to overshadow the perfect bride. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them all the truth, that Chloe had despised me from the very beginning, that she had resented my presence in Ethan's life, that every kindness tonight had been a performance leading up to this moment of public destruction. But when I opened my mouth, no words came. My voice had abandoned me, smothered under years of silence I had inflicted on myself. The waiters hovered uncertainly along the walls, their eyes wide, their hands gripping trays like lifelines. I caught the gaze of one young man, his lips pressed together in what looked like sympathy, but he said nothing. No one said anything. The silence was complicit. The silence was deafening. I could feel the wine dripping from my hem onto the marble floor, each crimson drop spreading like evidence of my shame. My skin prickled with the weight of stares. I wanted to run, to disappear, to claw my way out of that suffocating room, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in place as though every eye in that ballroom had pinned me to the spot. And in that suffocating stillness, realization struck me with brutal clarity. Ethan had never truly been mine. His loyalty had never been to our marriage, never to me. It had always been to them, to Chloe. To his family, to appearances. I was an accessory, a placeholder, a woman he could control by letting her believe she was loved. And I had believed it. God help me, I had believed it. The worst part wasn't the slap, or the wine, or even Ethan's betrayal. The worst part was the flicker of satisfaction I saw in Chloe's eyes, a victorious gleam as she nestled into her brother's arms. She had wanted this. She had orchestrated this. And Ethan had given her everything she wanted without hesitation. Memories crashed over me in waves, every time Chloe had mocked me for being too serious. Every time she had borrowed money she never repaid. Every time Ethan had brushed off her cruelty with a laugh, saying, "That's just how she is." Every time I had swallowed my pride and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I had thought patience would earn me respect. I had thought love meant enduring. But tonight proved the truth. My endurance had only taught them that I was easy to break. The ballroom seemed to close in around me, the chandeliers too bright, the air too thin. I couldn't breathe. I wanted Ethan to look at me, to see me, to remember the woman he had promised to love. But when his eyes met mine, all I saw was disappointment, irritation, as though my very existence had marred his sister's perfect day. And in that gaze, I saw the truth I had been running from for years. He had never truly been proud of me. He had only ever tolerated me. A hollow laugh bubbled up in my chest, though it never left my lips. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of love I had poured into him, 3 years of compromises and quiet sacrifices, and this was what it amounted to. A slap in the face, wine down my dress, and a husband who turned his back on me without hesitation. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Chloe that satisfaction. I would not let Ethan see me break. Not here. Not now. The woman they thought they had destroyed was still standing, even if she was bleeding inside. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers growing louder, some guests openly gawking, while others averted their eyes. The band members clutched their instruments in silence, their aborted melody hanging heavy in the air. It was as though the entire world had stopped to watch me crumble. And crumble I did inside. Silently. Invisibly. I felt my heart splinter, my trust shatter, the foundations of my marriage collapse in real time. I had walked into this ballroom believing I was loved, and now I knew the truth. I was expendable. I was alone. In that moment, I realized something that should have been obvious long ago. Ethan had never truly stood by me. Not once in 3 years. He had let his family belittle me, had let Chloe treat me like an inconvenience, had chosen their comfort over my dignity every single time. Tonight wasn't the first betrayal. It was just the first time it had been undeniable. And as I stood there, humiliated before hundreds, my cheek burning, my dress ruined, my marriage collapsing, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning. The silence in the ballroom was suffocating. I could hear the faint clinking of a glass somewhere in the back, the shuffle of a guest shifting uncomfortably in their seat, the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. My cheeks still burned. My dress clung heavy and wet against my skin, but the sharpest pain came from Ethan's betrayal. I was drowning in humiliation, sinking deeper with every whisper that rippled through the room. And then, like a storm breaking, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing across the marble floor. Sharp. Steady. Deliberate. Every head turned toward the sound, and I felt my breath catch in my throat as I saw him, Liam Carter, the groom, Chloe's brand new husband, striding toward the microphone at the center of the stage. His jaw was set. His eyes dark with fury I had never seen before. Even from across the room I could feel the weight of his anger, simmering beneath the polished veneer of his tuxedo. For a split second, I thought he was going to comfort Chloe, to protect her, to defend her actions. After all, it was his bride who stood clutching Ethan's arm, trembling theatrically with faux distress. But then I saw the way he looked at her, not with love or sympathy, but with disbelief and disappointment, as though he were seeing her for the first time. He reached the microphone, gripped it with both hands, and tapped it twice. The sound cracked through the silence, commanding absolute attention. The murmurs died instantly. 250 pairs of eyes fixed on him, the groom of the hour, expecting him to smooth over the chaos, to assure everyone that weddings are stressful and accidents happen. Instead, his voice boomed across the ballroom, calm but edged with steel. "Rebecca," he began, his words deliberate. "Did you just slap the CEO of Orion Media?" The room froze. The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, no one breathed. You could have heard a pin drop. I felt the air shift around me as confusion rippled through the guests. Orion Media. CEO. The words hung in the air, electric, unraveling the fragile facade I had lived behind for years. Gasps broke out across the ballroom. A woman in a glittering gown pressed a hand to her chest. A man in a crisp black suit nearly dropped his glass. The waiters, who had been standing stiff and silent against the walls, straightened immediately, their eyes widening as recognition dawned. And then the whispers began soft at first, like the flutter of wings, then growing louder, swelling into a storm of disbelief. Did he say CEO? Orion Media? That can't be. She's Ava Sinclair? I stood rooted in place, my breath caught in my chest, my mind spinning. My two worlds, Ava Sinclair, the woman who had built an empire, and Ava Morgan, the quiet, unremarkable wife, collided violently in that moment. And there was no hiding anymore. Chloe's face drained of color. Her bouquet slipped slightly in her hands, the petals trembling as violently as her fingers. Her wide eyes darted between Liam and me, confusion and horror warring across her features. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Ethan's expression shifted. Too, his smug certainty cracking into something else. Shock, fear, realization. His lips parted as if to speak, but he found no words. Liam's voice grew stronger, each word striking like a hammer against stone. The woman you just humiliated in front of 250 people is not some clumsy guest. She is the reason I stand here today as the man you call your husband. 6 years ago, when I was a struggling architect with nothing but dreams, when no one believed in me, she did. Ava Sinclair took a chance on me. She gave me the opportunity that launched my career. And without her, Chloe, without her, none of this, he gestured to the grand ballroom, the glittering wedding, the success that surrounded them, would even exist. The whispers erupted again, louder this time. People pulled out their phones, some already searching my name, their screens glowing with articles, interviews, magazine covers. I could see their faces light up with shock as they confirmed what Liam had said. That's her? She's been on Forbes. Orion Media is worth billions. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to run out of the ballroom and escape the flood of recognition. For years I had chosen anonymity, humility, the safety of invisibility. And now, ripped from me in one public declaration, my secret lay bare before everyone, including Ethan. The waiters sprang into motion. Seconds ago, they had watched me as if I were a stain on the celebration. Now, they rushed forward, bowing slightly, stammering apologies, offering napkins with trembling hands. "Ma'am, please. Please. Let us help you," one murmured, his voice shaking as he dabbed clumsily at my wine-soaked dress. Their sudden deference only magnified the shift in the room, the transformation from outcast to untouchable. But Liam wasn't finished. He gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles white. His gaze swept across the stunned faces, then landed squarely on Chloe, who shrank visibly under the weight of it. "You just slapped the woman who built a billion-dollar empire. You poured wine on someone who chose humility when she could have flaunted her success. You've revealed, not her, but yourself. And what I see disgusts me." A ripple of gasps swept through the crowd. Chloe swayed on her feet, her bridal glow now pale and shaky. She tried to steady herself against Ethan, but even he looked like he might crumble under the weight of the revelation. I felt my throat tighten, my heart hammered in my chest. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exposed, raw, stripped bare of the careful life I had constructed. My secret was no longer mine, and I had no choice but to face the fallout. The guests were no longer looking at Chloe, no longer whispering about her dress. Every eye in the room was on me, some filled with awe, others with shock, a few with envy, but all of them were seeing me differently now. No longer the invisible wife, no longer the clumsy sister-in-law, but Ava Sinclair, CEO of Orion Media. And yet, beneath their stares, I still felt small, because the one person whose eyes mattered most, Ethan's, wasn't filled with pride. They were filled with horror. He looked at me as though I had betrayed him by existing, by being more than he ever realized. And in that look, I saw the end of us written plain. Liam's voice dropped lower, but it carried to every corner of the ballroom. I was supposed to announce next week that Orion Media and Carter Architecture were entering into the largest partnership this industry has ever seen. But after what I've witnessed here tonight, I'm not sure I can. The words landed like a death sentence. The crowd audibly gasped, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Chloe let out a strangled cry. Even Ethan flinched, his face blanching as he realized the magnitude of what had just been threatened. 250 guests sat frozen, as if time itself had stopped. The fairy tale wedding Chloe had dreamed of had crumbled in an instant, replaced with scandal, shame, and the possibility of financial ruin. And I stood there, my body still trembling, my heart shattered, my secret exposed. But for the first time in years, I also felt something else stir deep inside me, something powerful, something unyielding. I wasn't the victim here. Not anymore. The ballroom was a sea of whispers and flashing phones, but for me, the world had narrowed to a single point. There was no going back. My secret was no longer mine. The life I had built behind careful walls had collapsed in an instant. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes burning into me, their curiosity mingled with awe and disbelief. I had lived 2 lives for so long that they almost felt like separate women. Ava Morgan, the quiet, supportive wife, and Ava Sinclair, the relentless CEO of Orion Media. Now those worlds had collided, crashing together in one spectacular implosion, and I was left exposed in the wreckage. Ethan stared at me as though I were a stranger. His face was pale, his jaw slack, his eyes darting between me and Liam, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that had been right in front of him all along. The man who had prided himself on being the provider, the head of the household, was only now realizing that the foundation of our life, the home, the vacations, the security had been built on my shoulders, not his. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and felt a strange calm settle over me. My cheek still burned, my dress was ruined, but my dignity shredded minutes earlier was slowly stitching itself back together. I could feel strength returning with every heartbeat. The murmurs swelled until they were deafening. Some guests craned their necks to catch a better glimpse of me. Others already held up their phones, no doubt capturing this scandal to share with the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years avoiding the spotlight, determined to be loved for myself and not my achievements, and now my identity had been dragged into the harshest light possible. I stepped forward, brushing past the waiters still fumbling with napkins at my stained gown. My heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as I approached the microphone. The crowd parted instinctively, the way people do when someone they underestimated suddenly commands the room. My hands trembled, but my voice, when I finally spoke, was steady. "My name," I began, my gaze sweeping across the rows of stunned faces, "is Ava Sinclair. Yes, the same Ava Sinclair you've read about in business journals, the same woman who built Orion Media from nothing into a billion-dollar company. But to most of you here tonight, I am Ava Morgan, the quiet wife who works some small marketing job and blends quietly into the background." Gasps fluttered through the audience, but I pressed on, each word pulling me further from shame and closer to truth. "I chose this," I continued. "I chose to live simply, to drive an old car, to shop at Target, to share a modest home with my husband. I could have had penthouses and designer gowns, a life filled with flashing cameras and red carpets. But I didn't want that. I wanted love. Real love. The kind of love that isn't dazzled by money or titles, that sees the woman, not the power behind her." I turned my eyes toward Ethan. He flinched under my gaze, his face tight, his hand clenching Chloe's arm as though she could steady him. I wanted a partner who loved me for who I am, not what I have. And so, I hid that part of myself. I thought foolishly that love would be enough. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of revelation. Ethan's lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of truth had crushed him. For 3 years I had let him believe he was the breadwinner, the protector, the head of our household. I had watched him bask in that illusion, never questioning why the bills were always paid, why vacations always seemed affordable, why financial stress never touched our lives. He hadn't asked questions because the answers might have threatened his fragile sense of pride, and I had let him live in that comfortable lie because I loved him, or at least, I thought I did. I remembered the nights when he would brag casually at family dinners about his role at work, when his parents would nod approvingly at him and glance dismissively at me, assuming I was the wife with potential, but no real ambition. I remembered Chloe's biting remarks, "You're lucky Ethan takes such good care of you," and how I had smiled through them, swallowing my pride, telling myself it didn't matter because I knew who I was. But it did matter. It mattered more than I allowed myself to admit. Now, exposed under the chandeliers, I finally saw the truth. I had been complicit in my own erasure. By hiding, by shrinking, by letting Ethan believe the illusion, I had handed him the script of my invisibility. And tonight, when it mattered most, he played that role to perfection, protecting his sister, dismissing his wife, and leaving me to drown in humiliation. I turned back to the crowd. "You want to know why I kept my life a secret? Because I've seen what power does to people. I've watched colleagues isolate themselves, surrounded only by those who want something from them. I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen. I wanted normal. I wanted family. I wanted love that was blind to money." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the faces staring back at me. Some looked ashamed, others fascinated, but none dared interrupt. But tonight has shown me something very different. Tonight I was slapped and humiliated in front of you all, And the man who vowed to protect me, who swore to love and cherish me, chose silence. Worse, he chose cruelty. My voice caught for a moment, but I pressed forward. The irony is staggering. I spent 3 years making myself smaller to protect his pride. And all the while, Ethan, you never once asked yourself why your life was so easy, why your dreams were funded, why your sister's debts never truly crushed you. You never wondered because you never wanted to. You thought you were the provider, the savior. But it was me. It was always me. Ethan's face crumpled. His mouth opened, but his voice was nothing more than a whisper drowned by the silence of the crowd. I straightened my shoulders, feeling taller than I had in years. "Let me be clear," I said firmly, my words cutting through the air. I didn't hide because I was ashamed of my success. I hid because I wanted to be loved without it. I thought that if I stripped everything else away, if I was just Ava, then I would see the truth of who loved me and who didn't, and tonight, I have my answer. The words hung heavy in the air. The ballroom was utterly silent, the only sound the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. I could see guests shifting uncomfortably, their expressions flickering between shock and pity, as though they had witnessed something both extraordinary and tragic. Chloe's face was ghostly pale, her carefully applied makeup streaked with sweat and panic. She clutched her bouquet like a lifeline, her wide eyes darting desperately between Liam and Ethan. She had thought tonight would cement her as the queen of the evening, the radiant bride bathed in admiration. Instead, she stood revealed as a petty woman who had tried to humiliate someone far more powerful than she could comprehend. Ethan, though, was the one who looked truly broken. His shoulders sagged, his face pale and damp with sweat. For the first time since I had known him, I saw him without the armor of pride and ego, and the sight was almost pitiful. But I felt no pity. Not anymore. Because in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. I had hidden myself to protect a love that was never real. I had built a facade to preserve a marriage that never truly existed. And now that the facade had shattered, I was finally free. The guests waited, holding their breath, as though expecting me to crumble, to retreat, to apologize. But I didn't. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and looked straight at Ethan as I spoke the words that had been building in me for years. "You never knew me," I said softly, but the microphone carried my words to every corner of the ballroom. "And now, you never will." As the stunned silence of the ballroom stretched on, I caught Liam's eyes across the room. There was something burning in his gaze, fury. Yes, but also something deeper. Loyalty, gratitude, recognition. And in that look, memories began to surface, pulling me back 6 years, to a time when Liam Carter was nothing more than a desperate architect with a portfolio full of dreams no one would touch. I remembered the day he walked into Orion Media's office. He had carried himself with quiet determination, though the nerves were written all over his face. His suit was slightly frayed, his shoes worn. But his eyes, they had shone, with a kind of conviction I rarely saw. He had pitched an ambitious development project, complete with intricate designs and bold concepts, but his problem was simple. No one believed in him. Investors had turned him away. Developers had laughed at his lack of connections. Other firms had brushed him off with polite excuses. When he stood before my team, I saw something different. He reminded me of myself in my earliest days when I was still knocking on doors, desperate for someone to take a chance on me. His designs weren't just drawings, they were visions. He spoke about buildings as if they were living things, as if they breathed and had souls. Most of my board was unconvinced. Too risky, they said. Too inexperienced. No name recognition. No security. They urged me to walk away. But I had learned long ago that the greatest rewards often come from the greatest risks. And I knew in my gut that Liam Carter wasn't just another dreamer, he was a man with talent, vision, and relentless drive. So I overruled the board. I threw Orion Media's weight behind him. We built an aggressive marketing campaign around his project, polished his brand, and told his story the way it deserved to be told. I poured resources into his work when every spreadsheet told me I shouldn't. But I didn't care about spreadsheets. I cared about potential. That campaign changed everything. Within months, Liam's designs were everywhere on billboards, in glossy magazines, across social media. Developers who had once dismissed him were now calling his office, desperate to partner. Investors who had turned him away were begging to be included. The project not only succeeded, it set the stage for an entire career. From that one chance, Liam Carter became a name in architecture, a man whose designs reshaped skylines, whose firm became one of the most respected in the industry. And through it all, he never forgot who had believed in him first. There were thank you notes in the early years, handwritten and earnest. Flowers on my birthday. An occasional email just to say, "I wouldn't be here without you." I never expected anything from him, never asked for favors or loyalty. I didn't need them. But Liam remembered. And tonight, as he stood there in his wedding tuxedo, microphone clutched in his white-knuckled grip, I understood why he had chosen this moment, of all moments, to speak. He wasn't just angry at Chloe for humiliating me. He wasn't just appalled by Ethan's betrayal. He was repaying a debt not with money, not with contracts, but with truth. He couldn't stay silent while the woman who had once saved his career was publicly degraded. Ava Sinclair believed in me when no one else would, Liam said, his voice ringing through the chandeliers and silk-draped tables. 6 years ago, I was a nobody. I had talent, yes. But talent doesn't pay rent. Talent doesn't convince people to invest. I had doors slammed in my face, people laugh behind my back. I was ready to give up. His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to look away. And then she came along. She didn't just sign a contract. She didn't just give me work. She fought for me. She took risks when everyone told her not to. She put her reputation on the line because she believed in me. And that one act of faith built the life I have now. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, though not from shame this time. Gratitude, surprise, even pride. I had never wanted recognition for what I had done. Helping Liam had been a choice of instinct, a reflection of who I was. But hearing him speak so openly, so passionately, about that chapter of our past was overwhelming. The guests leaned forward, hanging on every word. They had walked into this ballroom expecting a fairy tale wedding, but now they were watching something else entirely, a reckoning. Liam's voice hardened. So, imagine my disgust when I saw my wife. His eyes flicked toward Chloe, who visibly recoiled. Slap the very woman who gave us all this. Imagine my fury watching her pour wine on the dress of the person who made my success possible. It's not just disrespect, it's cruelty. And I will not let it go unanswered. The room crackled with tension. Chloe's face was ashen, her lips trembling, her hands clutching the bouquet so tightly that petals snapped beneath her fingers. Ethan looked like he might collapse, sweat beading at his temples as he realized what this meant, not just socially, but financially. Because Liam wasn't only my past, he was also my present. I knew what he was leading toward: the merger, the partnership between Orion Media and Carter Architecture. The deal we had been quietly crafting for months, the one that was set to shake the industry and make headlines worldwide. And now, in front of 250 witnesses, Liam was tying that future directly to how I had been treated. This wedding, Liam continued, his voice low and measured, was supposed to be a celebration of love. But instead it has revealed something ugly, not about Ava Sinclair, not about me, but about character, about who we choose to honor and who we choose to humiliate. He turned fully toward me then, his gaze steady, his voice softening with sincerity. Ava, I owe you everything. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You lifted me up when the world wanted to keep me down. And tonight, I will not stand by and watch anyone tear you down. The ballroom was silent, except for the sound of someone stifling a sob. I couldn't tell if it came from Chloe or Ethan. My chest tightened. For years, I had hidden my identity because I thought it would shield me from exploitation, from false friends, from shallow love. But in doing so, I had deprived myself of moments like this, moments where the truth of what I had built, the lives I had changed, shone undeniable. Liam's words weren't just his. They were echoes of every person I had believed in, every career I had helped launch, every risk that had paid off. And hearing them spoken aloud reminded me of something I had forgotten. I wasn't small. I had never been small. The audience was in awe, their judgment now redirected not at me but at Chloe, who stood pale and quivering, and at Ethan, who looked like a man watching his empire crumble. Liam's hand tightened around the microphone. Next week, I was going to announce that Carter Architecture and Orion Media were entering into the largest partnership either of our industries has ever seen. A partnership worth hundreds of millions. A partnership that was supposed to be my gift to my new wife and her family. But after what I've seen tonight, his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I don't know if that can go forward. The words struck like lightning. Gasps tore through the room. Chloe swayed on her feet, as though the weight of them might knock her over. Ethan muttered something incoherent, his face pale with terror. But me? For the first time all evening, I felt powerful again. Because I realized something simple. Something liberating. They could humiliate me, betray me, slap me, pour wine on me, but they could never erase who I was, what I had built, or the lives I had touched. And in that moment, standing in the middle of a ballroom filled with people finally seeing me for who I was, I knew that no amount of cruelty could take that away. The ballroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest until breathing feels impossible. Liam still gripped the microphone, his broad shoulders squared, his expression hard as granite. He wasn't the smiling groom anymore. He wasn't even the grateful architect I had once helped. He was something else entirely, a man who had drawn a line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. I stood rooted to the spot, every nerve in my body buzzing with anticipation. I didn't know what he would say next, but I knew it would change everything. His gaze shifted, settling first on Chloe. My new sister-in-law, though I already felt the word sister sour on my tongue, looked like a porcelain doll cracked down the middle. Her cheeks were drained of color, her eyes wide, her lips trembling as though she might collapse. She clutched her bouquet so tightly the stems snapped under her grip, but she didn't loosen her hold. Chloe, Liam said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Tonight was supposed to be about love, partnership, about starting our lives together. But what I saw instead was something ugly. Something I cannot ignore. Chloe flinched, the petals of her bouquet trembling. You humiliated a woman who had done nothing to you, he continued. You slapped her in front of 250 people. You poured wine on her dress like she was a servant, like she was beneath you. And why? Because your ego couldn't tolerate a small accident on your perfect day? Because you wanted to prove a point? Or because cruelty comes more naturally to you than kindness? The murmurs rippled through the crowd again. Heads turned, fans fluttered nervously, but no one dared interrupt. I watched Chloe shrink with each word, her shoulders curling inward, her chin trembling. I might have pitied her once. But not tonight. Not after everything she had done to me. Tonight, watching her stripped of her mask, I felt only a cold sense of justice. Liam's eyes darkened. You have spent months, years building an image for yourself. The glamorous influencer. The sparkling socialite. The woman who deserves the spotlight. But images crumble when tested, and tonight, yours crumbled. You showed every person in this room who you really are, selfish, shallow, and unkind. A collective gasp swept through the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded ever so slightly, as if to confirm what they had always suspected. I saw one of Chloe's bridesmaids cover her mouth, her eyes wide, while another discreetly set her champagne glass down, as though suddenly afraid of being associated with her. Chloe's lips parted and she whispered, Liam, please. Her voice was thin, trembling, but he didn't let her finish. No, he said sharply, his tone slicing the air. You don't get to play the victim here, not when the evidence is still fresh on her dress. Not when every person here watched you do it with their own eyes. My hand instinctively brushed at the crimson stain still seeping across the cream fabric of my gown. The wine had dried sticky against my skin, but Liam's words felt like balm against the sting of humiliation. But then his gaze shifted again. And this time, it landed on Ethan. If Chloe had looked like porcelain cracked in half, Ethan looked like a man stripped bare of his illusions. His face was ashen, beads of sweat clinging to his hairline. His hand still rested protectively on Chloe's arm, but it trembled slightly, betraying the fear clawing at him. "And you," Liam said, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "Her brother. Her protector. The man who promised to honor and love Ava. Do you know what was worse than Chloe's slap? Worse than her tantrum?" Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He didn't answer. "It was you," Liam thundered, his words echoing off the marble walls. "You had one chance to stand beside your wife, one chance to defend her when she was humiliated in front of the world, and you chose not to. You didn't hesitate. You didn't pause, you sided with your sister. You wrapped your arms around her while your wife stood alone, dripping wine, her dignity in tatters. You betrayed your vows in the cruelest, most public way possible." The audience gasped again, louder this time. People twisted in their seats to stare at Ethan. Some shook their heads, disgusted. Others whispered furiously to their neighbors, judgment painted across their faces. I saw one older woman mutter, "Shameful," under her breath, her lips tight with disapproval. Ethan's lips parted, desperate to defend himself, but no words came. His eyes darted to me, wide and pleading, as though I might rescue him. As though I hadn't been the one he had thrown to the wolves minutes earlier. I stared back at him, silent. I owed him nothing. "You talk about being a man, about being the head of the household?" Liam pressed on, his voice hard. "But what kind of man abandons his wife when she needs him most? What kind of man humiliates the woman he vowed to protect, just to shield his spoiled sister from the consequences of her cruelty?" The silence that followed was deafening. The chandeliers glittered overhead, throwing fractured light across faces that looked almost alien in their shock. I had never felt so seen, not for my wealth or my title, but for the truth of what I had endured. And then something extraordinary happened. The crowd, those same guests who minutes earlier had looked at me with pity or scorn, began to shift. Their gazes changed. The judgment melted away, replaced by something else entirely. Respect. Recognition. Even admiration. I saw it in the way they straightened in their seats, the way whispers hushed into silence, the way their eyes lingered on me, not as the clumsy sister-in-law who ruined a wedding, but as a woman who had endured public cruelty with dignity. One man in the front row leaned toward his wife and whispered, "She's remarkable." Another guest, a businesswoman I vaguely recognized, gave me the faintest nod of acknowledgement, her eyes sharp with newfound respect. Even the waitstaff looked at me differently, their posture straighter, their gazes reverent as they hovered nearby with napkins and glasses of water. It was as if the room had flipped inside out. The humiliation that Chloe had meant as my destruction had become her own undoing, and Ethan's betrayal had only magnified it. I felt the shift settle over me like a cloak. For years I had hidden my strength, my success, my true self, hoping to be loved for the woman underneath. But in this moment, in this ballroom filled with 250 witnesses, I realized something important. I didn't need to hide anymore. Liam's voice softened, though his words carried no less weight. Tonight, every person here has seen the truth. Ava Sinclair is not just the CEO of Orion Media. She is a woman of dignity, of strength, of loyalty. She believed in me when no one else would, and she deserves to be believed in now. Oh, Orion. 9.com. I blinked, my throat tightening. Emotion rising in waves I could barely contain. "And Chloe," he continued, turning back to his bride, "you need to decide who you really are. The woman you pretend to be, or the woman you revealed tonight. Because the mask can't survive forever." Chloe choked on a sob, clutching Ethan's arm, but he looked too shattered to comfort her. "And Ethan," Liam said, his final words like a hammer blow, "you have to live with the choice you made tonight. You showed your wife, your family, and this entire room where your loyalty lies. And it was not with her." Ethan's face crumpled, his mouth opening, but nothing came out. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like the man I had once loved had been hollowed out, leaving only weakness behind. The silence returned, but it was no longer suffocating. This time, it was reverent. The kind of silence that falls when truth has been spoken, when illusions are shattered and nothing can ever be the same again. And standing there, in my ruined dress, my cheek still stinging, I realized something profound. I was no longer invisible. Not to them. Not to myself. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. The silence after Liam's words was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. 250 people sat frozen, as if the entire ballroom were holding its breath. All eyes flicked between Liam, Chloe, Ethan, and me. I felt the weight of their stares pressing against my skin, but instead of shrinking under it, something inside me straightened. For too long I had let others define me. For too long I had swallowed words that should have been spoken, endured cruelties that should have been called out. Tonight, the charade was over. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The crowd parted instinctively as I approached the microphone, the ruined fabric of my gown dragging faintly across the floor. Each step felt heavy, but with it came strength, clarity, resolve. When I reached the microphone, I took it gently from Liam's hands. His eyes met mine, steady, supportive, and he gave the smallest nod as if to say, "It's yours now." I turned to face the sea of faces. The chandeliers shimmered above me, the air thick with tension, the cameras of smartphones already raised to capture every second. My voice, when it came, was calm but carried an edge of steel I hadn't heard in myself for years. "Good evening," I began, my words echoing through the cavernous ballroom. "For those of you who don't know me, and for those who thought you did, my name is Ava Sinclair." Yes, that Ava Sinclair, CEO of Orion Media. Gasps fluttered again, but I didn't pause. For the last 3 years I have lived as Ava Morgan, Ethan's wife, Chloe's sister-in-law. I have let myself be small, quiet, invisible. I told myself it was for love, that if I stripped away everything I had built, if I hid my success, I would find something pure. I wanted to believe I could be loved for who I am, not for what I have. I wanted to believe that was enough. My gaze swept the room, steady, unflinching. But tonight has shown me the truth. Tonight, I was slapped across the face by my sister-in-law, doused with wine, and humiliated in front of hundreds, and the man who promised to love and protect me, my husband, chose silence. Worse, he chose cruelty. He stood with her, against me. And that, more than the slap, more than the stain on my dress, is what broke something in me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw heads nodding, people shifting with discomfort, others listening with wide-eyed intensity. I turned, locking eyes with Ethan. He flinched as though the directness of my gaze burned. His lips parted, but I raised a hand, silencing him before he could speak. "Ethan," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "For 3 years I gave you everything. I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I let you believe you were the provider, the protector, the head of our household, when in reality you were standing on ground I built. I listened when your sister mocked me. I stayed silent when your family dismissed me. I told myself that patience was love, that sacrifice was strength. But all it did was teach you that I was disposable." His face crumpled, his eyes shining with desperation. "Ava, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." "You didn't know?" I cut him off, my voice sharper now. "You didn't know that your wife deserved basic respect? You didn't know that defending me was the bare minimum of the vows you made? You didn't know that humiliating me in front of hundreds was wrong?" He opened his mouth again, but no words came. The silence around us grew heavier, the crowd transfixed. I steadied myself against the swell of emotion rising in my chest. My voice softened, but it carried even more power. "The truth is, Ethan, you did know. You just didn't care. You chose convenience over courage. You chose your sister's comfort over your wife's dignity. And you showed me tonight that love without respect is nothing more than a lie." The words rang in the air like a bell. I could feel them landing not just on Ethan, but on everyone present. Ethan's knees seemed to weaken beneath him. His face was pale, his hand gripping the edge of the table beside him for support. "Please, Ava," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't say this here, don't do this. We can fix it, I love you, I swear I love you." I shook my head slowly, my eyes never leaving his. No, I said, my voice quiet but final. You don't love me. You love the version of me who kept herself small so you could feel big. You love the silence that let you believe you were more than you were, but you never loved me, because if you had, you would have seen me, you would have stood by me tonight. And you didn't. Gasps and murmurs swelled again, louder this time, carrying across the ballroom like a wave. I inhaled deeply, letting the moment wash over me, then spoke the words I had never thought I would say out loud. So let me be clear, for the sake of everyone in this room, for the sake of myself, I am done. Ethan Morgan, our marriage ends tonight. Consider this your notice. I will be filing for divorce. The air cracked with shock. Gasps tore through the guests, some covering their mouths, others whispering furiously to their neighbors. Chloe let out a strangled sob. Ethan staggered backward as though I had physically struck him, his face crumpling with anguish. No, he said, his voice breaking. Ava, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. Don't throw away us. I lifted my chin, my voice steady, resolute. We didn't build anything, Ethan. I built it. I built the house. I built the life. I built the foundation you so proudly stood on while pretending to carry me. And tonight, when I needed you most, you tore it all down with your own hands. There is no us left to throw away. He reached for me, his hand trembling, his voice desperate. We can go to counseling. We can work it out. I'll change. I'll be better. Just don't end it like this. I stepped back, out of his reach. No, I said firmly. This isn't one moment of poor judgment. This is 3 years of choices. 3 years of you choosing everyone else's comfort over mine. 3 years of me begging for respect in silence. Tonight, I choose myself. The words echoed through the ballroom, and for the first time all evening, I felt free. The guests stared, wide-eyed, as if they had witnessed something both terrible and magnificent. I could see it in their faces. The respect, the recognition, the understanding. Some nodded quietly, others whispered to their companions, but all of them were looking at me differently now. Not as a victim, not as a wife discarded, but as a woman who had reclaimed her voice. I placed the microphone back on the stand, the sound of it clicking into place reverberating through the stillness. My hands trembled slightly, but my spine was straight, my head high. I turned from Ethan, from Chloe, from the family who had never truly accepted me, and felt the weight lift from my shoulders. For 3 years I had made myself small. Tonight I stood tall. And as I walked away from the microphone, I realized something simple, something liberating. I had thought the slap and the wine were the worst moments of my life. But they weren't. They were the beginning of my freedom. I stepped down from the stage, the microphone behind me, the echo of my words still humming through the chandeliers. My ruined gown dragged across the marble floor, the crimson stain spreading like a battle scar across cream silk. But I no longer cared. That stain, that slap, that humiliation, they no longer defined me. What defined me now was the choice I had made, to walk away with my dignity intact. The crowd parted before me as I moved toward the exit, their eyes following me with something I hadn't felt in years: respect. Some guests whispered in awe, others lowered their heads slightly as if acknowledging a queen passing through. No one tried to stop me. No one dared. Behind me, I heard Chloe's muffled sobs and Ethan's broken pleas, but I didn't turn back. Their voices were chains I had carried for too long, and tonight I had dropped them forever. As I reached the doors, a firm voice called after me. Ava. I turned. It was Liam, still standing near the microphone, his tuxedo sharp, his expression steady despite the storm unraveling around him. The bride beside him looked crumpled and small, but Liam's eyes were only on me. For the record, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. Our partnership stands. Orion Media and Carter Architecture will move forward, exactly as planned. Because business is built on trust, and Ava Sinclair has more integrity in her smallest gesture than most people will ever have in their entire lives. A wave of murmurs swept the room again, but this time, the sound wasn't scandalous, it was admiring. I met Liam's gaze, gave him a small nod, and for the first time that night, allowed myself a genuine smile. Then I turned back toward the grand doors. The valet was already waiting, holding them open as though he, too, understood the significance of my departure. I lifted my chin, straightened my shoulders, and walked out into the cool night air, not as the humiliated wife, not as the invisible sister-in-law, but as Ava Sinclair, whole and unbroken. As the heavy doors closed behind me, I thought of the lesson tonight had carved into me with painful clarity. The greatest power a woman has is not her wealth, nor her reputation, nor the empire she builds. It is the unshakable refusal to let anyone diminish her worth. Love that requires silence, smallness, or humiliation is not love at all. It is a prison. And I had finally stepped free. I walked away from that ballroom lighter than I had felt in years. I didn't know what the headlines would say tomorrow, or how the world would spin the story. But I knew this. I would never again apologize for who I was. And that, I realized, was the truest kind of freedom. When I look back on that night, what stays with me is not the sting of Chloe's slap or the weight of the wine soaking my dress. It's the realization of how much of myself I had given away in silence. For 3 years, I thought love meant making myself smaller so someone else could feel larger. I thought family meant enduring disrespect to keep the peace. But humiliation has a way of stripping away illusions, and in that ballroom I saw clearly, love without respect is no love at all. True love never demands your silence, your invisibility, or your submission. Real partnership is built on mutual dignity, not sacrifice that leaves you hollow. I learned that power isn't in the empire I built or the wealth I accumulated, it's in refusing to let anyone diminish my worth. Walking away wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of reclaiming it. To anyone who has ever felt small for the sake of love or acceptance, know this. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be seen. And you deserve relationships that honor the fullness of who you are, not ones that require you to disappear. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.